Hello, and thank you for joining me yet again. This is the 12th talk in my series of theological discussions, and the title for this talk, the 12th talk, is Leaving the Seminary. Surprisingly, it was a lot easier for me to leave the seminary than what it actually was for me to join the seminary. And the reason why it was like all things, it's a lot harder to actually begin something than what it is to stop something, stop doing something. We only have to think about when we go to a job interview, how nervous we may be when we are preparing for a job interview. It's very nerve-wracking preparing to be accepted into a company or a firm. It's very nerve-wracking when we go through this process, and our actual preparation is a lot harder than what it actually is when we actually acquire the job and when we actually do the job. It's funny, but basically this is how life is. We have to jump through the hoops, so to speak. When we get a job, we must do these necessary things. Sometimes we may have to sit an exam, or we may have to do a medical, for example. So often, when we leave something, it's a lot easier than what it is to join something. When people find out that I was once a seminarian, often people will ask me, why do you still have anything to do with the church? Why do you still go to Mass? Why do you still call yourself a Catholic? And this is quite an interesting question, and it's actually quite a valid question for people to ask someone like myself who was once studying to be a priest. This is quite a valid question to ask. And when I reflect upon this question that has been asked of me at least twice in the past, I think to myself, basically, if I no longer supported the church, and if everyone no longer supported the church, in actual fact, there would be no church at all. It sounds a bit tacky, but in actual fact, we are the church. We've heard this expression many times, but in actual fact, we are the church. If we did not support the church, there would be no church at all. In actual fact, if we did not go to Mass, if we didn't send our children to Catholic schools, if we didn't go to Catholic universities, if we didn't participate at all in the many things that Catholicism has to offer, in actual fact, there would be no church at all. It's funny. This is actually quite a funny, thing that I'm saying, but in actual fact, it's very true. And I think it's something that we never really spend much time reflecting upon. We must take an active role in the church. The church at the moment is going through quite a difficult time, quite a difficult struggle. I don't think there has ever been any time within the church's 2,000 years of history when the actual leaders of the church throughout the world have been through this time that we are going through right now. There is so much scandal within the Catholic Church. I don't have to mention it in detail. We all know what I'm talking about. There are so many hideous and evil things happening within the very core of the church right now as I speak. The time in which we are going through right now has never been before. When we look back at the history of the church, we've had the Reformation, for example. We've also had the Spanish Inquisition. We've also had times when the church has burnt women at the stake and accused them for being witches and so forth. We've had many things happening in the church in the past, but we have never had this thing happen before. We are at a stage in a church where either two things shall happen in the future. When I say the future, I mean in basically 5, 10 or 20 years' time. When I say the future, I mean in 2 decades' time. So basically in 2 decades' time, two things shall become of the church. One, there shall no longer be a church. And two, the church that we have shall look like it has never looked like before. Now, the basics of the church shall always be there. We shall always have the Eucharist. We have been a sacramental church for the last 2,000 years. And when we reflect upon this sacramental nature of our church, in which we have had for the last 2,000 years, we actually realise that without the sacraments, in actual fact, we have nothing. If you were to take the sacraments away from our church, in actual fact, there would not be much at all to the church that we have. But what shall the future of this church look like? I really believe that everyday people like you and me must take an active role in the church. We must make the ones in charge know that the days when the faithful could be taken for granted are now no more. I'm not trying to start some kind of rebellion here, but it's a reality that we must deal with. We, the people of the church, must begin to play an active role within our church. If we don't begin to play an active role within our church, in 2 decades' time, there shall no longer be a church. There shall no longer be a Catholic church. We, the people, must begin to take a leadership role within the church. And what shall this leadership role look like? We don't really know what this leadership role shall look like. We don't really know at all. It requires much prayer. We must pray that when we begin to take a leadership role in our church, we must pray that the leadership role that we begin to take is in actual fact inspired by God. Because all things that mankind does never last. All things that mankind does are not eternal. The reason why our Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years is because Christ has always been the heart of our church. Our church has always been a Eucharistic church. Without the Eucharist, we have no church. We all must spend time praying and reflecting upon what shall my role be, what shall your role be in this church of the future. We must pray and meditate, reflect, and take an active role today. Because if we don't begin to take this active role within our church, in 20 years' time, the church shall be no more. If you like this video, please like it. Leave a comment below. Share this video with as many people as you can. And I would like each and every one of you to subscribe to my channel. And together we can all do great things for God.